This is our 8th grade lesson 2.3. This is actually a 2-day lesson, so I've split it into 2 separate videos. In this lesson, students will use the SlopeIntercept form or the y-intercept form to find the slope of a line as well as graph the line. The standards covered in this lesson are 8 EE6. The book page numbers out of the hardcover book are pages 62 through 67 and pages 33 through 36. We're going to start out pretty basic to begin with, and that's with working on identifying the parts of the slope equation. So first and foremost, we have to understand that this equation is also known as the slope equation or the y-intercept equation. The m in this equation represents the slope of the line. So when we worked last section on counting out slope, this is where we would put our slope, or where the equation is going to identify the slope. The x is still going to remain an x, and the b will represent the y-intercept, or the point on the y line where the line crosses. We're going to work right now on working just equations and identifying those two pieces, because in order for us to be successful in graphing the slope-intercept form, we have to understand where we're going to pull our numbers from. So as we look at this equation, y equals 3x minus 7, we're going to identify which of those numbers, the 3 or this minus 7, is our y-intercept and which one is the slope. Well, our slope is always directly connected to our x. So here, if I go ahead and I fill out my slope, that would be 3. Now, when we graph these, slope, remember, is always rise over run, so it would really be 3 over 1. Our y-intercept is where our starting point will be when we work on graphing these, and that's where our line crosses the y line or the y-intercept line. So here, this would be our y-intercept. So we would go to -7 on our graph when we start doing these, and we would put a dot. And from there, we would work through our slope and going through and connecting our dots. Okay, so right now, all we're going to do is focus on identifying the different parts of the slope-intercept, and then we'll advance that a little bit. Okay, so here's our next one. I have y equals 2x plus 3. So our slope is 2, because that's connected to the x, and our y-intercept, which right now I'm just going to put our y, is going to be a positive 3. Okay, as we start to go through and work these out, we have to understand which one's which so that we can find our starting point, which is our y-intercept, and then follow the slope from there to create our second dot and create our line. Oops. Let's try another one. Okay. So our slope on this one, well, our slope is 1/2. And take note, I'm not writing the x next to that. The slope is just the 1/2. So my rise would be 1, my over to the right would be 2 if I were graphing this out. My y-intercept is where it crosses the y line, or actually when we're graphing it is going to be my first step, is positive 4. Okay, so I'm going to slide one out, and I want you to do this next one independently. Okay, so try this one. Maybe go ahead and pause your video. Try this one out, identifying which is the slope of those two numbers and which is your y-intercept. Okay, so here we ended up with our slope as -3/5 and our y-intercept as positive 2. Okay, our next step as we're working through these is to also work with equations that are not in y equals format. So we have worked this back in chapter 1. We worked it earlier this chapter, where we want to work that equation to get it to say y equals. So we want to solve for y. So our whole objective is to get y all by itself. So we're going to work backwards to get that y by itself. In reverse, in inverse operations. So right now I have a positive 1 there that I need to get rid of. So the opposite of positive 1 is minus 1. And then minus 1. Now I have this in my y-intercept equation. So my slope would be 3, and my y-intercept would be negative 1. So we would go to our negative 1, and then we would follow the slope of 3 over 1. Okay, so let's try another one. This next one's a little bit more complex. That was a one-step removal. This one's going to be a little more complex. So here I have 6 plus 2y equals negative 4x. So we're working to solve for y and get y by itself. Okay, and I always do a box just because it helps me say, okay, what needs to stay there so that it helps me identify what should my first step be. So I need to leave the 2y because I'm solving for y. So I have to get rid of this 6, which right now it's positive 6, so I'm going to subtract 6. Now remember, from chapter 1, we cannot write minus 6 underneath here because these are not like terms. So I'm just going to write the minus 6 off to the side. Okay. All right, so that 6 is gone. Now I'm still working to get y by itself. So right now I have 2 times y. The opposite is to divide by 2. So that leaves me with just y on this side, but whatever I did to one side, I have to do to the other. So I'm going to do that underneath each of these. And the reason I'm doing them separately is I need to see those as reduced form numbers so that when I go to graph my line, I'm seeing the 2 separate numbers. So negative 4 divided by 2 is going to give me negative 2, and then I would just put my x behind it. Negative 6 divided by 2, well, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and it's a negative 3. So my y-intercept equation is negative 2x minus 3. This would be my slope. This would be my y-intercept. And we would include that negative with the 3 when we graph it. Okay? All right, so let's try another one of those. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and pause your video and work your way through this one, and then you can start the video back up once you're done and check. So you're going to go through and isolate for y, so solve for y, and then identify which of your numbers is the slope and which is the y-intercept. You can pause your video now. Okay, so here you would have ended up with your slope being 3/5 x and your y-intercept being positive 2. That's it for the first part of the lesson. And I chose to break this down into 2 parts because I need you to practice those concepts. So what you're going to do now for your homework is you're going to go to page 34 of your practice journal. And on page 34, you're going to have something that looks like this. Erase these. Okay, and you're going to go through and you're going to describe the graph that you would get, identify the slope of the graph, and identify the point of intersection with the y-axis. So this is page 34 of your practice journal. So we'll do the first couple together. So on number 2, I have for description of graph, well, all of these are going to be a line. So what I would like from you is I would like you to identify if it's a positive line or a negative line. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to look where your slope is. Your slope is telling you if it's positive or negative. So remember, your slope is connected to the x. So here it's a negative half, so it's going to be a negative line. So I'm just going to put negative. And then my slope of my graph would be negative 1/2. And the point of y-intersection, this is where it crosses the y-line. That's a positive 1. So right now I want you to, even when it's a positive 1, I want you to put +1. just so that I'm making sure that you're identifying when it's positive, when I have to go to +1 versus -1. Okay, so on number 3, we have y equals -x plus 2. So anytime we have where there's just an x, that really means there's a 1 in front of it. So when I look at this, I see that I have a negative, so it's going to be a negative slope. My slope is -1, or you could write it out as -1/1, that's up to you. And then my y-intercept, well, it crosses at +2. And number 4, we've got y equals -x minus 2. So once again, this is another one that's negative. Number 5 is not negative, so that'll be the first one that you don't have a negative. That would actually be a positive. So looking at number 4 again, we've got a negative slope. This would be a 1 in there, so it's -1 or -1/1. And this time my y-intercept is actually -2. Okay, so for your homework, you're going to go ahead and finish out the rest of this page, and then you can check with me and kind of check your work off of my my workbook that I go ahead and solve out. So good luck with this one, you guys.